Hello, I'm Amanda Beaver, and this is my video reflection, Effectiveness of a Unit Plan. I'd like to begin by examining some basics of unit planning that we have been presented in this module. First is finding direction with planning the entire unit. And teachers might do it around a textbook, a theme, or a singular type of objective, but it can all feel a bit like you're flying blind if you don't have standards to tie these unit plans back to. Second, creating objectives for the unit. I do like using the SMART acronym for framing the unit and lesson objectives because it gives you something that you can use to meet lesson to lesson, and it enables teachers to easily scaffold their content with careful planning. Additionally, unit plans will require student output. That is what a teacher wants students to do with the knowledge that they've gained, and teachers are able to gauge this knowledge absorption process by using a variety of formative and summative assessments. Finally, tailoring the unit, its content, and its output to your learners by using differentiation, scaffolding, and innovative teaching strategies. All of these elements contained together in one slide seems like a lot, but there are some very practical ways of seeing these elements applied in teacher observation. So let's talk about the most effective lessons. I'm going to begin with a colleague of mine, Mr. Mel. Mr. Mel has a great interest in project-based learning and has used collaboration in lesson planning to create a CSI crime scene investigation lesson that extends his unit textbook material and creates a simulated environment for students to take part in. This lesson is pretty involved as it requires a lot of planning and preparation to create the authentic environment and also devise different outcomes for students to investigate and explore. What makes the lesson effective is the complete immersion in the teacher-created scenario. Mr. Mel meets his students outside the classroom and explains that a crime has taken place inside. Students enter the classroom in groups to investigate the scene, and they are given masks and gloves so that they don't corrupt the evidence. Along the way, Mr. Mel uses several formative and summative assessments to check students' understanding in uncovering the key clues from the crime scene and also writing a newspaper story about the crime. In the group writing, he can reinforce grammar concepts he may have integrated into the scenario from his unit, such as simple past or narrative tenses and even reported speech. Additionally, throughout the course of the Teach Now program, I've had the opportunity to witness several videos of teachers in action in their classrooms. The following are two that have stood out to me as incredibly effective lessons. One of these lessons is in the classroom of Miss Cook. I chose to observe her lesson because it ties into the Common Core research standard that I selected to study for this module. Among the effective strategies I observed was the pre-teaching of vocabulary and encouraging students to predict meaning or supply their own impressions of what target words mean. Ms. Cook then uses a scenario and research inquiry to set students on the lesson task, informing their opinion of a school administration proposal to have classes all year round. Presenting this scenario engages students in an issue that they probably have an opinion on and provides background inquiry and motivation to find applicable resources that inform their opinion in order to take a viewpoint of persuasion. Ms. Cook uses graphic organizers and research worksheets to help her assess her students' abilities to understand and engage the material. But in the end, this is an incredibly effective lesson to me because it places students in a real-world situation with an issue that directly affects them. Ms. Migdal's project in roller coaster physics provides another amazingly effective example of lesson planning in practice. The scope of her project suggests that a phenomenal amount of planning and preparation went into it, and there are many things that she does extremely well in the execution of the project. Not only is she applying concepts of physics that she's taught in her class, she's also using collaborative learning in which everybody can play a part. Ms. Migdal builds elements of planning, design, construction, analysis, and budget into the project, creating groups of students where every individual can contribute. Ms. Migdal uses a process called chiming to get her students to share their ideas and also problem solve together. She herself identifies this as a formative assessment to get students to think about what problems they're having with their project, and leads into a next tier where she's going to ask them to incorporate the modification in order to improve their project. What's remarkable about the CHIME method is that students are required to have a roundtable discussion, but also take notes on what others are saying to see if their issues are matching their group's issues, and to also listen actively and build on what the others are saying. Another element of the collaborative process in Ms. Migdal's lesson is individual and group sketches, where individuals first have to plan their model for the roller coaster, compare it with their group, and reach a consensus. So they have to do some team building and problem solving to kind of build compromises and formulate the best design. Innovative strategies that she uses in this project and these lessons are, of course, using computer simulation to help predict the success of the design, again, which is taking place in a collaborative atmosphere, with all members of the team having some say in the final product. Finally, the last element of Ms. Migdal's project that really stood out to me was the budgetary element, where she gave students a budget, and then they had to manage themselves in order to purchase the materials for the simulation from her. So this adds another element to collaboration and another cross-disciplinary theme, like planning, budgeting, and managing the amounts of money that you have to work with. So how do these observations and my critical thinking of the lessons I've observed speak to my experiences with unit and lesson planning? Prior to this module in Teach Now, I had never planned an entire unit by mapping backwards to a standard. The standard that I selected for this module was a Common Core research standard, and one that I selected because, one, I wanted to learn more about the Common Core, and two, I was trying to find a way to make it work for my classes in my current teaching position. Looking back, I did definitely give myself a challenge by choosing that particular standard, because it's something, when developing the objective for the standard, I realized very quickly that that standard is going to work in tandem with several other standards, including an ESL or SURF framework standard, in order to be successfully implemented into my classroom. For example, I think it's very realistic to note that you may have an ideal for your unit plan, but it could be at odds with the practical application of that unit plan. This is why the importance of differentiation and scaffolding is so paramount. You need to be able to build materials that are going to involve all of your learners and engage them to the objectives of whatever particular standard you're using in that lesson. And since these standards are working together, scaffolding begins in one standard. For example, the research standard that I chose, scaffolding would actually begin in a reading standard or a reading comprehension standard to get students to the level where they can understand authentic text, authentic English text. They can understand, like in Ms. Cook's lesson, what it means to be trustworthy, what it means to be biased. They have those basic literacy skills before we take it to the next level and incorporate a research goal into their writing. Additionally, another important characteristic of a unit plan is being able to keep students engaged effectively to keep their attention and gather their interest into the content and the material to make a tie back to the standard and or even the assessment that you desire from them. So knowing what you want your students to do is very useful when mapping the standards, when creating unit plans, because it gives you that sort of summit to reach, that goal to strive for, and helps you break down those lessons into smaller pieces. If Miss Big Doll, for example, just told her students she wanted them to make a roller coaster, it could become apparent very, very quickly all of the different elements and pieces to that project, that unit project, that were going to have to be mapped out and accounted for, and ways to check the understanding and how that is happening. In conclusion, I've determined that perhaps the most important thing to keep in mind when you're developing a unit plan, aside from objectives, assessments, and what you want your students to do, is the ability to keep things flexible. If you need more time to visit an objective or part of the standard with your class, you should take that time to do it. This ties back to the ideal versus practical. Maybe we don't have all of the time in the world. Maybe we need to administer a summative assessment because our schools require grades. But effective lesson planning, to me, a very important ingredient is going to be maintaining some sort of fluidity so that that allows you to discover new things that your learners might need, or even new things that they might excel at. That's the end of my video reflection and presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.